she went without a tombstone until 1970. Even though money was donated several times for her to have a headstone. And I think that, and then Janice Joplin and a former worker in Bessie Smith's home put up a headstone for her in 1970, even though Jack G had thwarted effort for a long time for that to be done. Now, in any of your experiences, Steve, because as you put up 51 headstones now, that means that you potentially had to deal with 51 different sets of family members or cemetery, cemetery operators. What are some of the major? Have you ever experienced any problems where people didn't want you to do what you wanted to do? And they were adamant that you do not go farther.
There's been two cases that come to mind. The first one was for Jazz Gillum. We wanted to do a memorial headstone for Jazz Gillum. We knew where he was. I initially contacted the cemetery and asked for any family contacts, which they said they would look for, and ultimately they never found any for me. I asked people that I knew around the Chicago area for help in locating any family members, which we always do, and we found none, so we said, okay, well, cemeteries there, they have a policy where you can sign a waiver saying, I'm not the owner of this cemetery plot, and I understand that if I put this headstone down and a family member comes forward and doesn't want it, it has to be removed. Fine, I'm more than happy with that. So we set up our annual festival and said this year's going to be a fundraiser for Jazz Gillum. Got a harmonica player to come in and was going to play. It was on the poster. Like 3 weeks before the festival occurred, I get this phone call from the cemetery saying this woman is the daughter of Jazz Gillum, and she wanted to talk to me. Okay, and she said that she was aware that I was involved in a conspiracy with her brother to make her look bad, and would not allow me to put a marker on his grave. And I tried to explain to her that I didn't know who her brother was. I didn't even know that she was there, and that all we wanted to do was honor her father and his music. And she was adamant that we were in this conspiracy with her brother, and that she would not allow it. She didn't want any funds, and I said, okay, step aside. Ultimately, she did purchase a headstone for her father, and later finding out that she was not a legitimate daughter, so she didn't have a name, his name, so there was, I guess, no way that I would have known that she was that. And she ultimately put a stone, and at the end it said, and daughter Ardella. She put her name on his stone. It's like, okay, yeah. I'm glad that he now has a marker. And then another issue was Houston Stackhouse. I met his grandson, and he wasn't aware that his grandfather had a marker, and we explained to him who we were and that we would like to take care of that. And I was working with him and said, obviously, anything that we're going to do, we're going to run it by the family. We want your blessing and approval of anything that we do, and we were both excited about it. And a short time later, he phoned me and said his father said no, and that was the end of that. Those are cases where families have been.
He's buried in Crystal Springs.
He's buried in Crystal Springs, yes.
In the cemetery, not too far from the library?
Yeah, probably maybe 2 miles from where the library where Tommy Johnson's headstone resided for a number of years.
10 years.
And I did make contact with the sexton of the cemetery, and he had said, yeah, he's there, and if you want to put a stone, just put a stone, and I'm okay with it. I said, well, I appreciate that, but we're headstone, but we're certainly not going to go against any family wishes.
Yeah, so as, you know, as you guys get ready to put up, really raise more and more money, you've got a long list there, Steve.
Right.
Those issues, I'm sure, are probably going to come up more and more. I know we've definitely had a number of issues as far as dealing with similar things, as far as either a cemetery sexton or a landowner with problems that we had to get around or certain impositions. But go ahead.
We've, my kind of feeling is a great many of these that we've done, they've been in unmarked graves for 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. My feeling has been that if they haven't been marked up until now, there's either no interest in marking them, or there hasn't been any family member that we could contact. So in some aspects, when there's no family members, it makes it much easier because it's just an agreement between our organization and the cemetery. The cemeteries, all they're looking for is the placement fees. In these northern cemeteries, there's generally the placement fees are more than the actual cost of the headstone. So it's easier for us if there are no family.
And that was one thing I wanted to ask both of y'all, because I noticed that as far as the cost of the stones that you were talking about, they're relatively, it's under $500.
Yes.
Most of the stones don't have a very similar style. But Skip, a lot of these stones, a lot of the different headstones that y'all put up, you know, it costs more than that. But I don't think that there were any of these high fees that he's talking about associated, but I'm not sure. And I was going to ask, about how much did you have to deal with as far as problems getting these stones actually fabricated, designed, and what were the costs associated?
Well, we've never had, in my recollection, not at all had to pay a placement fee. Never even heard of that before. We've placed headstones. Big Joe Williams' headstone is at a cow pasture out in Lowndes County. It's out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it is out there, and the farmer have to be friends with the family. Every headstone is different. We've replaced 2 headstones where there were already existing headstones. Fred McDowell's headstone was spelled incorrectly. It was kind of falling apart. And Dick Waterman suggested that one to us. Bonnie Raitt paid for that one. We redid that one. And now you have the issue, what do you do with the old headstone? So my thing was, at the time, it was, you know, raising money for the Delta Blues Museum. So if you want to go see Fred McDowell's original headstone, you go to Clarksdale and see it at the Blues Museum. Similarly, we had Joe Calicut. Kenny Brown wanted to do something for Joe Calicut. He had a paving stone, just a square paving stone with just Joe. That was it. That was success. It just said Joe. I called Chris Strackwitz at our Holy Records, who was, you know, the only company that recorded Calicut at all, at which I highly recommend, if you can get a hold of that record. If you like the blues, you don't know Joe Calicut. There's only, I think, 6 or 8 sides on half of a record, but it's just fantastic. And he was Kenny Brown's mentor. But that was another one there. And one of the things, and this is kind of an aside, one of the things that we do, I don't know if Steve does this as well, I'd like to know, but when we take on a headstone, we take on a very wide array of responsibilities. One of them is maintenance of the stone. We will go back constantly and just make sure that it's kept up well and that kind of thing. We're actually rebuilding 2 headstones right now. Eugene Powell, the Delta is very loose soil, and you put a heavy rock on loose soil, and the rock is eventually going to sink down. So Eugene Powell's, we have to bring that back up, put gravel and a bigger base on that, because that's actually sinking down to the ground. We had a situation where with Sam Chapman, that the inscription was sitting on top of the world. His his favorite song, and then they spelled world wrong. So here we go out to CNN is there for this big unveiling, and it's Wolrod, WLRD, and you know, so that was difficult. So we had to basically rebuild that, and now we're replacing that because again, it's a stone that it's laying flat, and it's sinking down. They're the ones you have problems with. But that's one of the things that we'll do. And another responsibility is we will try to recoup any remaining royalties or monies that are out there when we approach a record company to see if there's any money that we can give to the family. This has happened once again with Joe Calicott. Chris Strakowitz, being the stand-up guy that he is, sent us a check for Calicott's 90-some-year-old wife for the royalties from that one record. It was a big hit in Scandinavia or something. He got $1,300. And then this poses a question because what money is always is a big topic here. I go to give the check to this 90-some-year-old woman for Joe's, you know, here's Joe's royalties, and she immediately got very agitated. And I didn't expect that, you know, I expected thanks and everything else, and she got very agitated. She started talking to one of her nieces, and the niece just burst out laughing, and now I have no idea what's going on. And she said, well, my aunt is angry because she thinks Joe's been holding out on her for all these years. So there was that, you know. In the case of Memphis Minnie, who you know has like a major theft of all her stuff for many years. It took 2 years to track down a company in England that was the major bootlegger for all her stuff. It's company. If you look, you can see it at truck stops whenever. The name of the company is Abracadabra, like oh magic, it's all gone. And eventually, when Bob Lawrenson, the attorney that we had working on it, did the work and tracked it to England, it just came back and said it's hopeless. You know, it's hopeless. You're never gonna. It's the stuff is all in Europe, and that's where it's coming out of. And you know,
that's a tough road.
That was a tough one.
I mean, when you got an individual like Chris who hands you the check and says, "Hey, this is what's up," but I was wondering about. I know that all the musicians that you're working on the stage, I'm sure they were probably at least had a record label that you know promoted their work, and I was wondering, other than the alligator situation, which really happened before you got involved in Twin Blues, right? Got started with Twin Blues. Have you been trying to, you know, just reach out to these record labels, see if they want to get involved, or?
Initially, I was trying to do that, and for the most part was stonewalled by secretaries that I couldn't get through past. So I guess I kind of at that point said, this is not the route to go. Yeah. That I mean, they're in the business to make money, not give money for headstones. So I haven't really pursued record companies.
That's incredible because they're the first people I go to, because they're the people that can benefit the most from any publicity that's generated around their good deed that they're doing in performing this act of honorable generosity or whatever you might want to call it. You know, Bruce Iglauer has always been, you know, and we're talking about small companies now, they're based on this, but he's always been really cooperative with us. I can think of some of the other ones we've done, but of course we had Lonnie Pitchford. Lonnie Pitchford is buried right next to Elmore James, which is the third one we did in Newport Baptist outside of Jackson. And that was, of course, Jim O'Neill. So Jim O'Neill did all the fundraising and everything else for us for Rooster Blues Records. Interesting about Elmore James, I was kind of surprised that Elmore James didn't have a headstone. But Phil Walden called me up right after we did the patent, Capricorn Records, and said we're doing a thing here. Capricorn Records is doing a promotional thing for this, and we'd like to provide a headstone for Elmore James. And I said sure. He said, you can give your tax number to our people. I mean, that was the thing right there.
Was that around the time the Fire Fury and Joy box sets were coming out?
Yeah, that was some of that stuff.
Right,
so we're talking about 92, 93. That was because Alvin Robinson was still alive. He was there at the ceremony.
Ollie Robinson.
Wasn't he the
Harlem Record Store?
Right, the Harlem Record Store.
Yeah.
Wow. But anyway, that was one, and a lot of times you'll find that some of the record company folks have a personal interest in doing this. And so once they find out that there's a legitimate company that's not going to take the money, that's actually going to have a track record, that's actually going to establish this, you're set to go. In the case of Phil Walden, famously the first manager of Otis Redding, the discoverer of the Allman Brothers, had a long track record of being personally involved with musicians. He didn't even really think about it until the story he told me at Hal & Mal's in Jackson was that he was getting a dental operation. He was getting a dental operation, and his dentist was a blues fan, asked him about Elmore James. And he said, as I started to go under the anesthetic, that's all I heard was this guy's voice talking about Elmore James. And so when he came around, the dentist told him that he happened to be an amateur sculptor. And he sculptured in dental materials, and he had a sculpture of Elmore James in dental material that he wanted to show Phil Walden, and you can put this on the headstone. Well, it so happens if you go to Newport Baptist Church, you'll see Elmore James' headstone with the sculpture that his dentist made, not in dental material, but it is in bronze, and it's on Elmore James' headstone.
I want to ask you guys one last question, then I'm going to open it up for questions from other people, perhaps more. But Steve, I know that you work a full-time job at a test lab that makes automotive shift systems, and so you definitely don't make any money off of the Killer Blues Headstone project. And Skip, I know you've worked as a social worker, and you explained that all to us earlier, and you were a guitar dealer, then you moved to New Orleans where you worked as a social worker at several different places that I've seen you at over the years. So, you haven't gotten paid anything for your work either. And then in 2009, or anyway, in the late 2000s, call me Daryl. Anyway, what I was wanting to ask was that what has been the most beneficial? What have you gotten out of this project? And during the time you've done this, what's the most scrutiny you've received, or has it just been all roses and praise?
The most that I've gotten out of this is the enjoyment and pleasure of being able to see these blues artists recognized and honored with the proper marker. On a few occasions, there's been instances where I've had really positive feedback with families. Eddie King in particular, his family was at the ceremony for the placement and invited myself and Aaron Pritchard, my vice president, back to their family home for a fantastic meal. His ex-band members came to the house and just slowly started jamming, and it was just a phenomenal experience to feel the gratitude of the family for that.
What about you? Ever been scrutinized for the work
Yeah,
you've done?
the scrutiny has been sometimes pretty difficult. There was a particular incident where we were going to do a headstone for Papa Charlie Jackson in Chicago, and we'd done research to the ends that we could come up with, and we had dates that we figured that they were the dates, and we had the stone cut, and it was ready to ship, and a fella, Randy Meadows, had turned up some more conclusive evidence that the dates were wrong. so it kind of admonished us for that, and said, oh, well, okay. So we had the stone shipped to my house, because we obviously were not gonna put it down there now, and recut the stone, and added a photo of it. And that was a tough one. And then there's, as far as, there's, I don't know if people know who Bob Eagle is. He wrote a book, Blues Regional Experience. And he's a number of times publicly chided us for what he considered bad research or whatever. And we've asked him to please keep it a private thing. I mean, it's, I don't want to say anything bad about Bob. He's done a lot of great research and helped everybody that wants to honor and respect the blues, but we're trying to do the best that we can, and hey, we're gonna make mistakes, but it's certainly not intentional sloppy research. It's,
Yeah. Sometimes things happen.
I don't have the resources that he does, obviously.
And sometimes, you know, the company spells world wrong.
It spells world wrong.
Yeah, but Skip, same question to you. What's, you know, been the most rewarding thing for you personally? And what's one of the things you've been scrutinized about?
People have proprietary interests in, you know, their favorite musicians. Music speaks to us emotionally. It becomes part of life events. It's a soundtrack to all kinds of sad things and happy things and so on and so forth. When you start to associate with one artist, you become, like, you have a personal bond with that person. Sam Chapman, Olivia Ray Watson, had personal contact with her. So when we started doing the Sam Chapman thing, basically I just stepped back. She's a force to be reckoned with. I said, you know, why don't you tell me what you would like to see? You knew the guy, you had a personal, emotional attachment to him, you know, so that was one there. So we will, basically, if there's a family member or something, they want something on this memorial, just open it up and just hear what people have to say. Columbia Records was kind enough. I asked Peter DeGraudick to do one of the inscriptions on the Zion Cenotaph. I did the other two. And then the people in Hazelhurst called me up when I was working in Greenville and asked me if they could use the inscriptions that I wrote on the Zion Cenotaph for the thing that they were doing in Hazelhurst. I said, it's fine. You know, it's no problem. I have no ownership with this, no proprietary thing. Basically, the satisfaction I get is to really try and save the land for the use that it was originally intended. Country churches were established in Mississippi traditionally to root a workforce. The land was given by a landowner. Now you had a church, and your workforce would stay there. Your grandmother was buried there. This was home now. You had a reliable workforce to deal with. Mechanized cotton picking comes in 1946. You don't need these large workforces. Now the land becomes more valuable than the workforce factor. Okay, and so now we're at that struggle over who owns the land, who owns that piece of hallowed ground, and my greatest satisfaction is just the accomplishment of being witness to say that, you know, it's not going to be row crops.
What about? Did you ever receive any scrutiny? Anybody ever question what you were doing?
Well, we get lawyers. That's the whole thing. And this is one thing I try to tell Steve. You try to do things as legally as possible. You as far as family members are concerned, you know, you're giving something to the family. If there's money to be recovered, it's not from us. We're not raising money to give out to family members. It's, you know, it'll be record companies or something like that, and then it's, you know, we can help them. But we've done 13 memorials. These guys did more in 1 year than we've done in 25 years. Of course, we're married to those 13. We're there, you know, in perpetuity. As long as the organization is there, we will be ensuring that they're, you know, kept up.
Yeah.
So.
And I've seen you guys post different stuff about somebody that was a weed eater. You know, some headstones. I've seen y'all do that several times. Excuse me, you ran off.
Questions?
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody from the audience, if y'all have like to ask a question, Steve Stalker, the Killer Blues Headstone Project, or Skip Henderson, founder of the Mount Zion Memorial Fund, you can just certainly go ahead and ask them now. So,
Are there other organizations that are doing this for other types of music, country, or something like that? I mean, I know there's obviously this sort of intrinsic poverty that goes along with a lot of blues.
I've actually, the only similar type organization I've run into is in the Chicago area, run into individuals searching for members of the Negro baseball leagues. But as far as musicians, I've never run into anyone else.
now there's been certain individuals who've done markers.
Right.
Like out in California, the Southern California Blues Society did a couple, and then you worked with Arlo Leach,
Yes.
who put up markers for Will Shade and another individual, and then y'all helped them out after that.
For the Joe and Charlie McCoy.
And he was a musician and a teacher at Old Town School.
Yes.
But he wouldn't have an organization.
Yeah. So as far as you know, individuals, but not
Yeah.
not other organizations really in terms of music.
I've worked with various blues societies to assist them, and we've made donations to 9 other individuals that when we can work with a local blues society, we much prefer let them do it. We just make a nominal donation to it. So
It seemed like Arlo did start some sort of organization for Will Shade. It was like the Will Shade Project, but it was.
Just that.
Yeah, well, then they did another individual. I can't remember who the other guy was, but they were starting individual projects. Instead of the Killer Blues Headstone Project, which was the Will Shade Headstone Project. They have a website that's still up and tracks all the progress, and it says it's complete. And then the website sort of just ends there. It's still up, but it ended. But that was,
yeah.
One of the more interesting things in the South is that you'll find, again, under the Cemetery Society rubric, you'll find in certain cemeteries there'll be a plot of land that's for just union members. Okay, in New Orleans, not far from where I live, there's a cemetery called Holt Cemetery. Holt Cemetery is traditionally in New Orleans is the pauper's field. And Buddy Bolden is buried in the cemetery. When you go in, there's a cenotaph for Buddy Bolden. But there are also, it's almost like a folk art. It's like a folk art landscape, you know, because people get shot, all kinds of murders. I've been to a number of funerals there for people that I know that have been murdered. But eventually what will happen is family members will come out and put like a favorite chair on the grave, or start decorating stuff for them, decorate it for Mardi Gras. When the Saints won the Super Bowl, you could go to any cemetery in New Orleans and see Saints stuff on here, little cemetery things here and there. We won Pop, we finally did it, whatever, you know, football helmets, the whole deal. But so cemeteries in the South are like living places, more than any place else that I've ever been. But in Holt Cemetery in New Orleans, there's a headstone. It's a headstone, and the headstone was placed there to be close to Buddy Bolden. There's a cemetery society in England, okay, that if you want to be buried in the cemetery where Buddy Bolden is buried, you know, they will, you know, you'll join their society and they will bury you in Holt Cemetery. And so there's a whole plot there. So I mean, there's all these different iterations of this kind of thing, but. For sure, you want to see an incredible sight. Holt Cemetery in New Orleans is unbelievable. props to my hometown.
For the graves that you said we're not allowed to put markers on, do you continue to have them documented somewhere so that they don't just fall out of recorded history?
We have